For more on the U.S. women's national team, our good friend Jeff Kassouf joins us. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm good, Herc. I'm back from Orlando, so I got a few warm days.
Lucky you. Nothing but rain and hell over here, so I'm a bit jealous. All right, Mallory Swanson. She was left off the Olympic roster by Vlatko Andonovski. Certainly no leaving her off the World Cup roster. Right now, 6 games, 6 goals. Is she the most important player for Vlatko Andonovski?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's undeniable at the moment, right? This is a team that I think we saw in the SheBelieves Cup at times, and this is true of any team that's trying to win a World Cup. You have to grind a little bit against other top 10 opponents, and you need a player to come through. In 2019, that was Megan Rapinoe at the World Cup, obviously. And I think you look at Swanson, the form that she's in, we're talking about the immediate here, this 6-game streak. And that's like, we're in a World Cup year now. The world's starting to notice. She's been on this form for going on really 2 seasons in the NWSL and really carrying into the U.S. picture here. So, I think undeniably, especially with how important wingers are in this system, she's the most important player for them right now.
Jeff, what's the biggest change you've seen in Mallory from that Olympic era, the Olympic moment of not getting called in until now?
Yeah, I think she's been really introspective. I mean, look, this is a player who was a teenager when she started. She came in with a lot of pressure. I mean, it was 4 years ago or so now that I think every media outlet that we could imagine had sort of the think piece on this being Mallory Pugh's time to break out and shine. And, it came with a lot of pressure, and she's still a relatively very young player, and she's matured quite a bit. I would say since that Olympics, even in those, that year or so before that, she's talked about it. I've talked about it with her about she had a couple of trades within the NWSL that sort of opened her eyes. And I think she's sort of kind of processed all of these with things that you could look at and say, maybe that was a negative, or you could let fester and become a negative if you're a player. And she kind of looked within herself and said, you know what, I need to look forward. And I think as simple as that might sound, and Herc, I mean, sometimes the mental aspect of that, you just got to get that right and get out of your own way sometimes. And I think she's talked about quite a bit that she's been able to do that, not let herself get dragged down by perhaps some negative news in the moment, and look forward. And really the past 2 years, she's been on a tear. Absolute
tear. She's absolutely figured it out. The question now I have for you, let's shift into the midfield, is has Vlatko figured out the midfield?
So, I mean, I think he's had it figured out in his mind, right? I mean, Andy Sullivan, Lindsey Horan, Rose Lavelle, that's been the trio for most of the past year. Even in this transition, it's been clear that that's what we're looking at, especially with the unfortunate injury to Catarina Macario, who should be back soon, and trying to figure her out in the 10 last year in spring. So, I mean, I think the starting midfield core, he has known. What I think we learned in the SheBelieves Cup, at least a little bit more, is about his depth. I think Ashley Sanchez in particular, Rose Lavelle missed the first 2 games with a slight injury, and we saw Ashley Sanchez, I think, did pretty well in that number 10 role. We saw her in New Zealand as well when Rose Lavelle dropped deeper. I think we saw there a player who, certainly Lavelle is the starter there, right? But you're going to need some rotation. You're going to need to rest some players at times when you can, or hopefully you can at a World Cup. And I think we saw from Sanchez in particular that she is up for the moment, whatever that moment might be. When that time comes, I think we saw a little bit more of Kristie Mewis, first time starting in about a year, over a year now. And a player who, you look at this SheBelieves Cup, and if you're a player who's not getting minutes now with only 1 international window to come before the World Cup roster is named, you're probably worried about where you stand. And we hadn't seen a lot of Kristie Mewis, and then we saw her in multiple roles at this tournament. So I think perhaps an indication, too, of how Vlatko Andonovski sees her as a depth player in the midfield. So I think we learn more from this tournament maybe about the reserves and the depth, and certainly we'll see roster rotation at the World Cup, than we did about the starting trio, because I think we knew who that was.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about a little bit more of a change, a proposed change in calendar for the NWSL from fall to spring. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so I've been reporting on this for a few weeks. I mean, look, it's early stages. It is an idea that's on the table, and I think the key thing to figure out here, the key thing to say is, in the past, I think people would dismiss this, and I know we've got some MLS news already about some weather problems at the start of the season here, right? So people are, rightfully pointing out that there are plenty of markets where the weather is bad. But what I know from reporting right now is that this is an idea that is being taken seriously in a way that it was not previously. And the NWSL, which we've talked about on this show a few weeks ago, needs to find solutions to a serious calendar problem that isn't going away. And they finally sort of started to realize that in a way that they've got to look at a fall to spring idea at the very minimum. What could this look like? What could it be as a proposal? And they have to take that seriously because, one, FIFA's calendar is based on Europe. That's not going away. FIFA's calendar is getting more crowded. And we're about to have a second division women's league in the US that runs on a fall to spring calendar. So there might be a bit of a template there. Look, I don't know if this gets across the line, if it gets anywhere close to that, but it's something that is in the conversation, which right now is heating up. And by summer or so, there's going to need to be some kind of a solution for the long term of what this NWSL calendar is going to look like.
Hey, Jeff, before I let you go, I have to ask you, going back to the SheBelieves Cup, has Vlatko Andonovski under-delivered with this U.S. women's national team heading into this World Cup?
So I'm probably going to be in the minority here, I think, from a lot of folks that I've seen talking about this. Look, my answer to that is no, because if you look at what he was tasked with, and of course, the World Cup's going to tell us everything, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you have to get results there, and the task there is significant, a third straight World Cup title for the U.S. But we've got to, when evaluating this, like, you've got to rewind this 3.5 years and look at why was he brought in and what was he brought in for, right? And, you know, any coach coming into this was going to be the thankless task of replacing a coach who had just won 2 straight World Cup titles, and, to the context, turning over a team that was really, you know, 2 straight World Cups, was the oldest team at that tournament, at the respective tournament, and had a lot of tough decisions to figure out with veterans. And the task for him was not only go win, and the Olympics were part of that, obviously it was a bronze medal, but go identify what are the next 10 years going to look like? Who are these players going to be? And I think that's the task that, you know, we get caught up in some of these micro decisions of who's on a roster, who's not, who hasn't gotten looks. But you look at this team, depending how the final roster looks, they're going to go looking for that 3rd straight World Cup title with a roster with only about 1/3 of the players who were there last time. So the turnover has happened, and that was a big, if not 1A of the task alongside winning for Andonovski. So I think when you evaluate it in that proper context, yes, there were rough periods last year in particular where even at the end of last year, right, where we were wondering what's going on here. But I think you have to look at that big picture of that sort of 4-year full cycle. And obviously it's going to end at the World Cup. We'll see. If they bomb out at the World Cup, I think he'll be the first to tell you didn't get the job done. But having turned over the generation of players, that's happened. And now we'll see what the task is. But in that sense, he had to do these things. I think he's had to manage some really tricky situations within that. And in that sense, no, I don't think he's under-delivered at all.
Jeff, what would you say the biggest question mark today heading to the World Cup would be for Vlatko?
On the roster, I mean, I think there's probably a couple places you look at. Who's the center back pairing? I think Becky Sauerbrun's the captain, so I think it's pretty safe to assume she's going to be one of those players. Is it Naomi Girma? Is it Alana Cook alongside her? And then, you know, I think the midfield, as much as there's some hand-wringing over it, you know, we know who that is. I think we've got our answers fully healthy of who the fullbacks are with Emily Fox and Crystal Dunn. And the wingers, I mean, we talked about Swanson, and when Sophia Smith is healthy, those are, you know, first names on the team sheet. So I think maybe the biggest question that we're looking at, and part of this, again, we've talked so much about health of this team. Catarina Macario is coming back. Is she a 9? Is she a 10? You know, Rose Lavelle being that 10. You know, I think this boils down to the 9 position. Is it Alex Morgan, who's been on, you know, very good form herself for the past year, including for the U.S.? Is it Catarina Macario? I think the answer is probably somewhere in between as far as the tournament goes, splitting a group stage perhaps, assuming Macario is healthy to do that, and then see what that looks like in the group stage. And then, you know, you evaluate from there for the knockouts. But, you know, I think that could be one of the biggest looming decisions for Andonovski is it Morgan? Is it Macario? And then whichever one he goes with, there's some different consequences to that in terms of the team shape and how Swanson and Smith play off that player.
Jeff, my man, always a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.